Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Deep Six Podcast, coming to you once again from somewhere just outside of Orlando, Florida. As always, I'm your host, Steven Spevak, joining you once again on a lovely Sunday morning, afternoon, or whenever you may be listening to this through the week. As always, joining me through the power of the internet is our wonderful co-host, Mr. Matt Barnes. Matt, how you doing this week?
Hey, how's it going, Steve? Wonderful.
You sound like you're wonderful.
Oh, it's hot.
Don't you have air conditioning?
I don't have it on because we're recording a podcast.
Oh, you're taking the audio quality into consideration. I love it. Thank you. But we're here once again. 2 weeks as usual. Did try to do a weekly thing, but didn't pan out. We're going to try that here again in the future, hopefully. But the last episode, we briefly discussed the recent Netflix show Glow. Of course, I hadn't finished it by the time we recorded last time, but I have finished it.
Yeah.
And I think now's as good a time as any to get into a little in-depth discussion about the show for a few minutes here. You wanna take the lead on that, and I'll follow.
Sure. I think that number one, it's a show about people that happen to wrestle, and it's not a wrestling show, which I think is important to note, so that you don't have a stigma about what the show is before you go into it. It'd be like, saying that Friends was a show about people that work in a coffee shop. Okay, well, they hang out at a coffee shop a lot, but, it's not really about a coffee shop. Kind of just a dumb thing to say. So it's kind of the same thing with Glow, that it's a show about people who wrestle, but it's not a wrestling show. And I think that's good, because I think that the people are really important for that show. Now, I think, the other major thought I have about the show is that there wasn't enough to it. There wasn't enough episodes, and it was 30-minute episodes. So, you get 10 30-minute episodes as opposed to, 13 one-hour episodes for, some of the Netflix dramas. So I felt like a lot of, some of the storylines that I wanted to see more about just weren't explored. So I don't know what your take was on it, but that's kind of where I came from with the show, that there was a lot more I wanted to see out of it. So while I think it's good, I think it could have been great.
Yeah, I kind of felt the same way. I felt like there were points in there that either got not enough time, or there were certain things in there that felt like they got a little too much time. But I do agree with you on the fact that it's not a wrestling show. It's very clearly not a wrestling show, and I think I enjoyed the fact that it was more character-based outside of wrestling than it was about the wrestling. I think it was a very interesting take on a drama to involve wrestling and not put it, kind of at the forefront of the show. I do agree, though. I do feel like it was too short. I feel like the episodes could have been an hour long. Or they should have, boosted the amount of episodes that they had. It was what? It was 8 episodes?
It was 10.
10? Yeah, I think even if they went, double length on the last episode or something like that, something just felt like it went really fast. And
specifically that there were story threads they hinted towards that they never really explored.
Yeah, I caught on that too.
More with the Wolf Girl's background. Like, they hinted towards something really interesting there about her as a person. I wanted to see more of that. They did like that weird, like, lesbian tension storyline with Machu Picchu and the British girl.
Yep.
That they never really went back to. There were just really some interesting side stories in the show that they could have went with. And I think sometimes those side stories seemed more interesting than the main story they were telling, which was, that Allison Brie is kind of, the villain of the show, and they were really playing that up because you didn't expect that. And but these side stories they seem like the backgrounds of these characters are more interesting than what we actually got to see.
Yeah, the main story at points felt like it was really flat, and like they were really pushing it a lot harder than they needed to, and it became I don't know what the word I'm looking for. It felt clustered, especially towards the end where I don't remember who is the co-star of the show. I forget her name.
You mean like the main co-star who played Elle? That's Betty Gilpin.
Yeah. Her character towards the end, who's already, decided she hates her husband, this, that, and the other thing, just kind of has this weird, like, change of heart after putting everything into this wrestling show, and decides once they finally are about to make their television taping debut to just sit out and leave everybody high and dry.
I don't think that's necessarily true, because I think if you analyze the last episode again, she's wearing her wrestling costume underneath her real clothes. It's not like she went and changed. So it makes me feel like they were trying to play it up as like she was working everybody, like she learned a lot about wrestling along the way. So she was working everyone the whole time. Like she was never planning on not doing it. She just wanted to get her husband there to see her do it.
Well, that's a good point. That's not a perspective I got out of it. So, I mean, if you look at it that way, it kind of makes more sense now that you think about it. I mean, yeah, that honestly...
I thought. So I could be wrong, but I feel like that's what they were hinting towards with the fact that she was wearing her outfit underneath her clothes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that now that you bring it up, but that feels like that's a little deeper than the show was hitting it at on a regular basis. But
clearly, but I feel like that whole last episode was set up to be like uber inside wrestling. With the way that Sam really becomes a wrestling promoter in the last episode, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I could see that. That makes sense. But yeah, character-wise, I really enjoyed all of the characters the show had. I think the character development was, as good as it was expected to be from these Netflix shows. And there were characters that I wanted to know more about, and hopefully, we get that with a second season, which I assume we will get a second season. But I think there's a lot of stories as well, like you said, that they were hinting at that they never fully, went into, that will probably be touched on in a second season.
Right. I would think so. I just feel like the first season could have used more of it. But who knows? I mean, Netflix seemingly has been doing this with their shows this year, at least, that they've been going oddly with short episode orders, where they've been going with, like with Castlevania, they did 4 episodes instead of the right amount.
Well, I think Castlevania also is only 2 months between seasons.
I don't know. I don't think the season's coming out yet, so I don't know. But they went with 4 episodes for the first season, and they're only doing 8 for the second. They're going with short episode orders. So I'm not really sure what the motivation there is, but it seems like that's just something they're doing in general with, I guess, things that they're labeling as more risky or more chancy.
I think it also could be the fact that this whole releasing a whole season at one time thing kind of, I guess, puts it out of the limelight a bit faster than they would like. So
that doesn't help go with 10 episodes where you can do 13.
Yeah. I mean, I know there are a lot of people who like to sit and binge watch things. I'm one of them. But it seems to me like, oh yeah, I got real excited like the month leading into Glow. Glow premiered, watched it in the first week, sat on it, thinking about it for, a week and a half after that. And then it kind of just became, okay, well, what's the next thing? I feel like if you release episodes, maybe instead of all at once, release them on a weekly basis, kind of like Hulu does with a lot of their stuff. Or
Netflix tried that with one or two series, and I don't think that it worked as well as they wanted it to. Those series didn't last as long as some of their others.
Well, I think
Netflix, their model works better with the binge watching.
Yeah, I think Netflix also has that, I don't want to say stigma, but that, mentality of a Netflix viewer is, you're going to sit down and you're either going to watch a movie or you're going to binge watch, 6, 7, 8 episodes of a TV show. I don't think people are going there and they're just like, oh, I'm just going to watch one episode of this and then I'm going to go about my day. Netflix, to me, is one of those things where you just sit down and you just marathon something.
I think their data shows the same thing, that people sit there and they watch for hours, not like one episode of something and then leave. People sit there and they watch for hours. So I think that that's why they design content that way, whereas Hulu, I think, is different. People go there just to watch one episode of something because of the serialized nature of how they release things, where, like say you're watching Gotham and you're watching it weekly. You're watching the new episode that they upload on Tuesday mornings weekly. So for them to do a show the same way, their original content isn't a big surprise to anybody.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. But let's move on from Glow and Netflix, and we'll talk about some real women's wrestling that we've got here, at least that a live audience got, and a lot of people read spoilers through on the internet, which won't even air until the 29th of August. But the Mae Young Classic happened this past weekend, and I was in attendance. Matt, I was texting you through the whole thing, and you were reading spoilers as they happened. So let's discuss that for a minute.
Sure.
Of course, let's harken back to our previous episode where we discussed potential talent for this tournament, which I think we hit quite a few right on the head.
Yeah, I believe we did.
There were names that we brought up that I don't think anybody else really would have considered that wound up in this tournament. I think Mercedes Martinez is one of them.
Yeah, I don't think she was really on anybody's radar.
And then, of course, your favorite, Miss Shayna Baszler, who wound up in there. And not to get too heavy into the spoiler talk, but is moving on to the... Yeah, she's made quite an impression.
Now, how did that come off live, how she's performed thus far? What was live reaction like to how she's been?
She immediately played the heel.
Right. So over with the crowd, because she's pretty she's making a big name for herself independently at this point.
Yeah, she immediately played the heel.
She had some level of fame before she came in anyway.
Yeah. I think her first match was against Zeta, who also has some MMA background, not as extensive as Baszler, but their first fight was presented as kind of a shoot fight. And it was one of those things where, it's a first-round match, so it's got a 15-minute time limit, and they've got to put 16 matches on through the night with, all of these talents. And it was quick, but with that shoot fight, presentation, it felt good, and it hid the fact that that Baszler, I don't want to say she's green, but working that WWE style, she seemed a little uncomfortable with it at first.
Well, I think a lot of the people that they brought in for this are going to be uncomfortable with it at first, because there is a big difference between TV presentation wrestling and what a lot of them are doing independently.
Well, quite a few of them came from Shimmer, if I'm not mistaken.
Which still isn't TV presentation wrestling.
No, but they are wrestling to a camera, which if you've never wrestled to a camera, you're going to be a lot more green with it than if you have.
To be perfectly fair to everybody involved, almost every single company in the world, independent or otherwise, films all their shows. So it's not that these companies that they're working for, that they're not used to working in front of a camera. I think that would be a little short-sighted to say. I just think that there's a big difference in terms of how you present a product for television and a television audience, and how you do it for a live audience that just so happens to be filmed and put on a DVD later.
Yeah, I mean, I see your point there. But Baszler, yeah, like I said, Baszler seemed a little green at first, a little uncomfortable. Could also have been because she was in there with someone she hasn't worked with before. Not that I know that she's worked with anyone else that she actually wrestled in this tournament. But I would assume there are other people that she's crossed paths with down the line. Because Zeta is one of those talents that they kind of seemingly pulled out of nowhere. I think she was just a model at the time that they signed her.
Yeah,
of course. She was
a fitness model.
Yeah, so, I mean, it was... I don't know if that was just on Baszler, though, in that match, because as far as I understand, that was Zeta's television debut as well. So, could be a little bit of the both of them kind of getting out there for that first time in front of a real TV audience. And I don't know. But Baszler is definitely someone I feel they have high expectations of in the back office.
It would seem that way based upon the presentation and how she goes to the tournament.
Yeah. But I was really surprised with how good this tournament played out. Of course, the Cruiserweight tournament, looking back on it was great and all, but it felt really dry at times, and it seemed like some of the matchups were a little off. But I think through the 2 nights of tapings that I sat through, we sat through about, I think it was like 32 matches. And
32-person tournament, they're down to the finals. I think it's 30 matches.
Well, there were also 2 tag matches that they did through the tapings.
Yeah.
They did a dark tag match with the alternates, which had Dina Purrazzo, and the other names escape me. There were so many matches. And then
Cole Matthews in one of them. Yeah.
And then they did a 6-women tag with 6 of the competitors that were eliminated. But this to sit through 32 matches was it sounds grueling, but the way the tournament was presented and the matchups that they gave us were so strong that I think there's only one match that I can think of that didn't really get over or keep everybody's interest, and that was the first match that featured Lacey Evans. I don't remember who she went up against, but it was that first round match that she had, and it just kind of felt like a really odd pairing. And I think it also being Lacey Evans' first real television match.
Yeah, that's possible.
Her being so, what's the word I'm looking for? I think there's high expectations for her because they've been building her up on the house show market for NXT for a little while, and they've even been using her in some of like the NXT promo stuff on like the Facebook page and the Instagram accounts and things like that. So I think there's a lot of high expectations.
Want to go places with her. She's one of the WWE agenda people for the future.
Yeah, that's definitely how I see it. First round, like I said though, was crazy. To sit there, 16 matches, it felt like we were only there for an hour. compared to sitting there for 4 hours.
Well, yeah, and I think you have to keep in mind that, that they're filming to put a lot of those shows are going to have 3 matches on them. And then they're going to fill it with backstage interviews and shit that you didn't see live, but they're probably going to do them. So well, I think that the added elements they're going to throw in there as well.
They did it like a typical NXT taping where they pretty much told you when they were starting a new episode because they tell the crowd to get hot, when the stage lights up, go crazy, do this, that, and the other thing. And they filmed 4 episodes for the first round alone.
3 episodes or 3 matches per episode, right?
No, the entire first round is going to go by in 4 episodes. So that would put...
So a lot of them are going to be 3 or 4 matches on an episode. That's what I said.
Yeah, so there's about 4 matches an episode. And then I don't exactly know the breakdown of the second round and the quarterfinals and the semifinals, how that's going to air out.
Well, I think we can only base it upon seeing what they did for the Cruiserweight Classic. And a lot of that was 3 or 4 matches on the first round episodes. And the second round, I think they did 2 or 3 matches per episode. If I remember right.
Correct me if I'm wrong here. They staggered out the Cruiserweight Classic, right? They didn't put up multiple episodes at one time. It was a weekly thing.
They did it weekly, but from what I understand and what the rumors are, they're going to be releasing all the Mae Young Classic episodes at once.
Well, no, when they did the Parade of Champions, that's the reason I asked. JR mentioned that the first 4 episodes will go up on August 29th.
So the entire first round's going up at once, and then they'll probably put the whole second round up at once. Yeah.
But yeah, the entire tournament, we got the entire tournament up to, the semifinals, and the only thing we didn't get was the final match, which of course will be happening in Las Vegas sometime in September, I believe, the end of September.
The real home of Glow.
Yeah, which is kind of interesting if you think about it.
I think that was very on purpose.
Yeah, it seems to me like it was very on purpose too. But real quick, before we move on to the next topic, what do you feel like the outcome of this is going to be? Do you feel like this is just going to be...
I think they're going to find a handful of talents that they really like and try to sign them and bring them in. And then otherwise it gave exposure to a lot of the other talents that they wouldn't have otherwise gotten, that they can then use to make themselves more money on the independents. But I think in general, it gave more attention to, the fact that there is some really, really good women's wrestlers out there right now, which I think should be the point.
I agree with you. I also feel like this could potentially be setting up something similar to what they did with the Cruiserweight division post-tournament. Maybe doing an all-women show.
Sure. I mean, there was that rumor out there that they were giving a title to whoever wins. But what would the title be for? Because there's already 2 women's champions on the different brands, and then there's the NXT women's champion. So what would it be the title of? So obviously there has to be something there.
Yeah, I don't think that they've announced, aside from the fact that the winner's going to get this trophy that they've been showing through the tapings, that there's anything else involved. Triple H even came out.
This is the same thing they did with the Cruiserweight Classic too. They talked about a trophy the whole show, and then they just came out with a title before the last match.
Yeah, I that's what I want to say. Triple H came out before the semifinals and did a whole speech, recognized Sarah Del Rey and all the women in the tournament for coming out there and busting their asses, but he never made mention of anything being...
Well, that would kill the surprise.
That's true. I agree. I'm just saying that he made his appearance and there was nothing that seemed like there's going to be much of anything, at least hinted. He didn't even at least hint to that
I mean, they didn't do it for the cruiserweight either, so
That's
I
true.
think that we shouldn't be far into that.
That's true. But I would, after seeing the amount of athleticism and the competition that the women in this tournament, they gave their all in this, I would really like to see that more regularly. And I feel like an all-women's show would do a lot better than an all-cruiserweight show.
I don't know. I mean, it would do better than a cruiserweight show. I hope it's closer to what they're doing with the cruiserweights if they do something with it than it is to like the UK tournament where they did that whole tournament and they awarded a championship, but they've literally done nothing with it since then. They just have, a couple UK stars sparingly appear, but otherwise they're still independent workers.
Well, I think they only signed, like 5 of them out of that whole tournament to developmental contracts?
They're not doing anything with them.
Yeah,
they're just letting them work overseas. I mean, Pete Dunne's been working here. He's been working U.S. independents and Canadian independents, too.
Yeah,
they're not really doing anything with any of the people they signed there. They didn't start a UK show. They're still no closer to putting UK independents on the network. So it just doesn't seem like they had any real plan for that.
Yeah, I feel like the UK tournament was kind of a letdown post-tournament. But I also feel that this tournament that they just did, the Mae Young Classic, they're going to wind up probably signing quite a few of the women involved.
If they're doing a show, then probably very likely. If they're not doing a show, then I would say probably a handful. That's it.
So then where, not to get too far off on a tangent here, but where does that put the women that are currently involved in NXT and the women that are currently involved in the main roster?
I don't know. That's why I think it's so complicated about doing a women's show. I think that the likelihood of there being a women's only show just seems so slim because the logistics would be so difficult to work out. Because what do you do with the NXT women's division? Do you just port the whole thing over? Or do you have people come down from Raw and SmackDown to make it seem special weekly and do matches with the main roster on there too? I don't know how you work that out. It just seems like there's not a lot of thought process behind it.
Or do you just kind of give an adrenaline shot to the women's division, both the main roster and NXT, sign a good portion of the talent involved in this tournament, and just go to town, make women's wrestling within the WWE really legitimate again?
Bad idea. I think that wouldn't be a bad idea. But I don't think they've made up their mind yet. I think that's why we're not quite sure what's going to happen.
I think that also could be why they're taking so long to put this up on the network, and then they decided to have the finals somewhere else. I think they want to judge also the reaction outside of Full Sail to some of this talent, because obviously the show that they do in Vegas is going to wind up having...
Yeah, and we'll see based upon what the content of that Vegas show is. Like, are they going to have, like a Raw Women's Championship match on that show to make it seem extra special? Are they going to have, an NXT Women's Championship match on that show? Like, they make it just a big celebration of everything they have in women's wrestling. Or are they going to load it with a bunch of other shit with men in it just to try to spark it? I really don't know which way they're going to go with that.
As long as it doesn't wind up with all of them on Monday Night Raw, where they turn the entire arena pink, I'm probably going to be pretty okay with the outcome.
Yeah, we'll see.
So we'll move on then. Of course, we didn't get a chance to talk about Spider-Man last week because we didn't do a show last week like we were planning to do. But I guess now is as good a time as any to give our thoughts on Spider-Man, especially now that we've had a week to ingest it and digest it. I know your thoughts on the whole thing have kind of flip-flopped over the last 2 days or so.
I think that's natural, I think.
Do you want to take the reins on this one?
Yeah, initially I thought that the movie was really good. borderline great. Like, I thought maybe, like, look, like, it's like likely the best Spider-Man movie that's been made, and I think the Sam Raimi movies are trash, and I really liked the Amazing Spider-Man movies. I still think Andrew Garfield might be my favorite Spider-Man, and I would have liked to have seen more of those movies because I think they were doing something interesting with it. Regardless, so at first I kind of thought, okay, well, maybe this is the best Spider-Man movie because, it has the Marvel tie-ins and it has the right tone and, they got aspects of Peter Parker right. But, with more time, I've just kind of started to swing around on it and started to look more at some of the things that are problems with the movie. There are a lot of holes in this movie. And, I didn't necessarily see it on my own. If you're familiar, people out there listening, Max Landis, writer, director, et cetera, went on like a long Instagram. I don't want to call it a rant because it wasn't a rant because he did admit he's a Spider-Man mark. Like, he's a big fan of the Spider-Man comics. And he liked the movie. He thought the movie was good. But he went on a pretty decent size like rant with himself, just responding to himself, talking about all the things that he thought were problems with the story in the movie and about why the movie doesn't really work. And a lot of what he said was very valid. And the more I kind of thought about his points about what he didn't like about the movie, the more it made me kind of see that the story of the movie just isn't very good. There are a lot of plot holes there. And, with seeing that many holes, it's hard to put the movie up there as being one of, the best Marvel movies. I mean, for me at this point, I don't even think it can crack the top 5 of the Marvel movies because it just has too much that didn't work.
So let me kind of bounce off the Max Landis stuff for a second because I just read it before we started to record, and he compared this to being the Man of Steel of the MCU. And
correct, which was somewhat of a controversial stance that kind of is what got me into reading the Twitter talk that he had about it, because people were like livid that he compared it to Man of Steel.
But his comparison is that they kind of took backstory and elements of the character that were borderline, not even borderline, that were essential to these characters up until this point, and just completely yanked it away. And
well, I think that the difference for me there, and this is just to keep an open dialogue on it, the difference for me there is that I think that the world should have been ready for a new take on Superman, because we've dealt with, almost 100 years of fucking Boy Scout Superman.
Mm-hmm.
And they say it's a movie with no hope, but I disagree. I think there's a lot of hope in the movie. And he got no kind of like a disagreement with a couple of fans on Twitter about, some of the current Superman comics are kind of filled with storylines like that, where it's very dark, and, he kind of has to keep the hope artificially alive, even though he kind of sees that the world is dark now. Doesn't really see it as being all great like it used to be for the Superman comics. So where I agree that there's something there. There's a tie where, both characters are missing in those individual movies some of the emotional background parts that would, we would normally be used to seeing. I think for Spider-Man, it's very essential to the character that it has that, because it's all the drive of the character. Whereas I think Superman doesn't necessarily need that.
So let me present this then. How much of that backstory that was omitted from Homecoming do you feel that they left out just because either one, the fans already know it, and two, because we can kind of just fill in those holes and assume that it's there?
I think it's, based somewhat on, backlash that DC got for, in Batman vs. Superman, showing the death of Batman's parents again, where, we've already seen it 3 times on film. We don't need to see it again. And I get some of that sentiment, but when it's a core motivator for the character, I think that you at least need to talk about it. And in Homecoming, they don't even talk about it. They just kind of allude to the fact that something happened in Peter's past that drives him to be a hero.
I remember there was one point where Peter said something about Aunt May and everything that she's been going through. I can't do that to Aunt
May, not everything that she's been through over the past year.
Yeah.
And that's really all they talk about. They don't talk about what happened. They don't talk about how it happened or why it happened. And you never really get this feeling at all throughout the movie that Uncle Ben was important to Peter.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. And before this whole discussion that we've been having over the last 12 hours or so, can't say that it didn't bother me. I think not including Uncle Ben in that origin made me feel a little weird while watching the movie, but at the same time, I kind of overlooked it because while this, looking back on it, may not be the best movie that Marvel's made, as I thought, initially, it's still a really good movie. So it's not to say that this alone is makes it a bad movie, but I think there were other things that they hit right on the head with this character that haven't been hit on too much before that made me overlook omitting that particular part of the backstory.
Yeah, I like they don't talk about his origin really at all in the movie. I think the most you really get out of it is, oh, we can't do that to May, and I got bit by a spider, Ned. The spider's dead. That's really all you get about Spider-Man's origin in the movie. So it's not like his origin and his morals and what was instilled in him isn't important to this character at all. I mean, that's kind of what I get from it. And I don't know that Marvel intended that, but because they completely omit any kind of conversation about it, that's what it does.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think it definitely makes their it puts a weird hole within the whole Spider-Man story and makes things feel a little weird once you sit down and really think about it. But it could also be one of those things where, okay, this is the film we wanted to do. We got these points across. We kind of, believe the audience would be able to fill in those holes, with their own, imaginations or whatever. But maybe when we go to make the sequel, we'll kind of do a flashback. We'll bring up that with great power comes great responsibility line. We'll hit on these things we omitted.
With every other Marvel character, they didn't have you assume that you knew the backstory going in. They kind of assumed that some people that were going to go see the movie didn't know shit about comic books. And in this one, they kind of want to have the audience assume some knowledge of Spider-Man, whether that be because you've seen 2 Spider-Man series before, or that you read the comics, or anything in between. They want to assume that you have some knowledge about the character before you go in. And I think that's a little excluding. Because if you don't have any knowledge of the character, you kind of think Peter's just kind of a prick at the end of this movie.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, trying to look at it with as much...
Where Peter only really cares about being an Avenger. He doesn't really care about some of moral obligation to be a hero.
Yeah, I mean, I guess trying to think about it as someone who would have no... I don't want to say no understanding, but very limited understanding of the character. Say, for example, some kid, it's the first time they're seeing a Spider-Man film, or, they've never really read a comic. They've only seen the TV cartoons here and there. I can agree with that. They shouldn't have just assumed that people would know this character. So I definitely agree that omitting it kind of is do I want to say egotistical of the studio or unthoughtful of the studio?
I think that it's just I honestly don't think they gave it that much thought. They just made a movie that they thought would fit in well with their universe, and they very much made a Marvel Spider-Man movie. They didn't make a Sony Spider-Man movie. They made one that fits in with the MCU. And a lot of the MCU is characters kind of flittering between motivations, I would say. There's one pure character in the MCU, and that's Captain America, and that's it.
Yeah.
Who all about, like, he's my friend, Tony. Like Captain America, you know what you're going to get. But every other character kind of flitters between what motivates them. And in this one, you kind of get the impression that Peter is motivated just by being an Avenger, and that's it. He wants to be an Avenger. And I don't think that's right for the character. I think Peter and Spider-Man is one of those characters that, unlike Man of Steel and Clark Kent, Superman, he's very defined by the things that happen to him that make him who he is. Like Uncle Ben dying, and like Gwen Stacy, because I'm watching Amazing Spider-Man 2 right now. Peter is very defined by what happens to him that, creates this sense of, justice in him. And to take that away kind of makes it a different character.
Yeah, it really does. And it's making me more and more uneasy about this film and my thoughts on it.
I didn't mean to break the facade. I just thought it was a really interesting topic that, I didn't necessarily notice it at first either. And then I read that long post, and I'm not going to read it because I do have it open, but I'm not going to read it. I think that, anybody who's listening should go search this out.
No, we'll link it in the show notes. We'll leave it there for you guys to find very easily, because we want you guys to read this, and we want your opinions on Max Landis's thoughts and our thoughts on the film as well. So we'll definitely leave that in the show notes. But back to what you were saying.
They're just super valid. I think that it just makes it a different character. And I don't, he's very specific in saying that he didn't dislike the movie. He liked the movie. I like the movie. I think it's a good movie. I think it could have been a great movie. Much like we were talking about Glow earlier, I thought it could have been a great show. And it was just a good show. If they're going to keep making these movies where, nothing happens to Peter, he just kind of haphazardly goes through things and, I really like Liz. I want to be with Liz. And okay, well, what are you going to do about it? Well, I'm going to destroy the Washington Monument, and I'm going to almost get her killed, but she's not going to care that I skipped out on a debate club at all. Like, nothing fucking matters that happens to him during the movie.
Well, we do also know that...
kind of just lets everybody down over and over again because he's selfish, and nobody cares.
Yeah. We do know, though, that Spider-Man is basically going to be the cornerstone of this next phase of films that they're doing. But that worries me if there's no grounding for the character that makes him the character that he is. But I also have enough...
Now, he's not the character that he's always been in the MCU because there's no emotional ground for him.
Yeah, but I also have enough hope within Marvel Studios to correct that going forward.
I do not, and that's only because this kind of viewpoint that's being shared by not a lot of people, but some, isn't going to be something that people are going to tell Marvel or that Marvel's going to pick up on because the movie made a lot of money and people are going to review it very well regardless, that they're not going to pick up that there were problems with the movie.
I mean, that's possible. And considering the fact that Infinity War, which apparently is going to be a major part of the Spider-Man story as well, just wrapped production before this really came to light.
I think I told you what I would do with the sequel. I would do Mysterio because it happens right after, apparently, Avengers 3 and 4, which is the Infinity stuff. That, a Mysterio story could very well work with that because, he could be making Peter see, his dead friends, like, probably Tony Stark is going to be dead, or, Captain America is going to be dead. And he can make them see those people, and it can really play with the mental stuff. So it can really work within the context of the MCU to have Mysterio be his next villain.
I don't disagree with that at all. I think that makes a lot of sense. I also feel like they're turning the tides of the MCU after Infinity War or with Infinity War. And who knows? We could see, a Tony Stark die, and that could be that Uncle Ben moment of the MCU. Not that it needs to be, but
the Uncle Ben moment should be the Uncle Ben moment.
No, I don't disagree with you.
Stark dying shouldn't be more important than, his father figure dying.
No, I don't disagree with that. I'm just saying, just based on, looking at these omissions that they've done and the way that they've set up this character, that potentially something like that happening could be where the MCU version of Spider-Man gets his moral grounding.
Sure, I guess I could see that. I just feel like he deserves better than that.
No, I don't disagree with you there at all either.
I think that people wanting to have new cornerstones in like the next phase is why we're getting stuff like the Fantastic Four rumors and people like, well, I saw a trident in the background of the Thor Ragnarok trailer. Okay, so what, you think like fucking Namor is going to be in Thor? Like, I think that's why people are so excited about all these rumors, because they want different cornerstones.
Yeah.
But, the existing cornerstones shouldn't be what motivates Peter to be that guy. It shouldn't be that.
No, I don't. Like I said, I completely agree with everything that you said.
Because then it validates all of our fears that, the Spider-Man movies and the MCU are just, self-gratifying the MCU. They're not actually Spider-Man movies. They're just like, oh, we got the rights to use Spider-Man, but we're going to use it to just prop up the rest of what we've already done.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm still sitting in this weird place with all of it,
It kind of feeds into this idea that, like, if Marvel had the rights all to themselves, we would have maybe seen something slightly different, or parts of it be different.
Yeah, I think that's a given, because if they hadn't had, this is the 5th Spider-Man film that's been made, or 6th.
Yeah, 5th.
That,
well, like, you count the 70s type stuff that they were going to do.
Well, there were 3 Sam Raimi films, and then there were 2 Amazing films, so this would be the 6th.
Right.
So, I think had those other films not been made and Marvel had the rights all along, well, of course you would have gotten Uncle Ben. Of course you would have gotten all of that stuff, because they would have needed to explain the character on film for the first time. And I think even if Marvel wound up getting the rights to this character after all those films, if they had full rights to this character going into this film, not having to do it with Sony, I feel like it could have also been probably approached differently as well. I don't know how much involvement Sony had with the story development of this film or things of that nature. So I don't want to sit here and blame Sony for...
I think from everything we know that Sony's involvement was, now, where they're just waiting for the money.
Yeah.
That's Sony's involvement in the movie. Because otherwise, they turned everything creatively over to Marvel for the movie.
I mean...
I
don't know.
It still worked, because you've gotten a movie that's getting better reviewed than any of the movies that you've put out recently.
That's true. That's very true.
And this is the best reviewed Spider-Man movie since Spider-Man 2, and the Raimi movies are garbage. I think that if we think back to the time they came out, they were very good for the time, but now they're just cornball. They're just not very good, and that's I don't know if that rating really matters at that point.
No, I mean, like I said, I don't know how much involvement Sony had, so I'm not going to sit here and put blame on Sony. But
Oh, I'm not
just
blaming Sony either. I think that the creative for this was all Marvel.
yeah, I'm just saying based off if Marvel had had the rights all along or had completely acquired the rights, I feel like maybe it might have been a little bit different. But is there anything else we want to touch on with Spider-Man directly before we move on to our last little bit of discussion here?
Not really. I think that the movie kind of I think when you start to read some of, the things that people didn't like about the movie, that it becomes very obvious kind of what this movie's all about. I think that a lot of people aren't going to notice some of those things until they have somebody really bring it to their attention, because it's just cool to see Spider-Man in the MCU. And, that's going to take a while for people to get over unless they specifically look it up. So I don't know that I have anything else really to add beyond that I think it's worth opening your mind to a different viewpoint.
So, what's your final stance on the whole film?
What, like a rating?
Sure.
I give it like it's tough because what did I give Wonder Woman? Like a 6 out of 10, and this is better than Wonder Woman. Like, I'm not going to pay to see Spider-Man again, but do I want to see it again? Yeah, I want to see it again. So, like a 7.5. There's just too much that they could have done better with the movie for me to rate it any higher.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I think my rating would probably sit maybe just a tad higher than that, because even though, yeah, this might not in essence be a great Spider-Man film, still a really good movie, still a really fun movie, and I think it's one of the better offerings from Marvel.
I think when I think about things I'd rather watch in terms of Marvel movies just by itself, I'd rather watch both Guardians of the Galaxy movies. I'd rather watch Winter Soldier. Movies like that I think are very, very, very much better movies. In terms of just Spider-Man movies, I foresee myself, even if I have Spider-Man Homecoming to watch, I would still very likely watch the Amazing Spider-Man movies before that.
I mean, that's a valid point from everything that you've said. I still think, though, that I'm going to put... I did have Homecoming in my top 3, but I think it's probably going to wind up on the bottom end of my top 5 at this point. But yeah, I don't think it was a bad movie, and I thought it was a great movie until you brought all this shit to light, and then now I just think it's a good movie, but I don't think it's I don't think it's a
movie. I don't think it's the best they could do, but it's fun.
Yeah, I agree. It was very fun, and it was very fulfilling, at least as a longtime Spider-Man fan, to see him in the MCU.
Yeah, of course. And I certainly think that the ending withstanding, that you should see it just for Michael Keaton playing the Vulture, too, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that he was one of the more, at times, terrifying Marvel villains. Because in the movie, at points, he can be very terrifying, just the way he portrays the character. So I think it's worth it for him alone. The ending withstanding, because I think the ending of the movie was really shitty.
And the twist in the film as well really got me.
Yeah, but that was kind of spoiled for me. So
it wasn't spoiled for me because I did my best to stay off the internet once everyone started seeing it.
But I think that if you really watch that movie objectively and you go back, you kind of see it coming if you go back and watch it again.
Yeah.
It's not all that shocking if you think about it.
No, but I think it was well done in
sure.
the scheme of things.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that his portrayal of the character is one of the reasons you should watch it.
Yeah, so then we'll close out the direct Spider-Man talk right there, and we'll talk about some of the things that could spin off of this Spider-Man film. One of the major things I think that we've been discussing over the last few hours. Of course, we're recording Saturday, July 15th. It's about 1:30 Eastern Time. We are waiting to hear about the Avengers film from the D23 Expo, which should happen sometime later today. Of course, it'll probably happen as soon as we're done recording. But
it's still pretty early West Coast, so it might be later in the day.
There's heavy speculation that the Fantastic Four could wind up being involved in Infinity War. And to tie this back to the Homecoming discussion for a second, of course, if you've seen Homecoming or if you haven't seen Homecoming, not a major spoiler, but Tony is selling Avengers Tower, or has sold Avengers Tower. And, of course, that's got people rumbling about, well, who is the buyer of Avengers Tower? And, of course, it could very well be the Fantastic Four.
I think that's underselling it a bit, because they talk about this plot thread throughout the entire movie over and over and over again.
Yeah, they really do.
They keep cutting back to Happy Hogan. I'm cleaning out the tower. We sold the tower. We did this to the tower. The tower. The tower. They talk
It's
about
moving
the tower
day.
the entire fucking movie, and then there's no payoff for it in the movie.
Exactly. So, of course, major speculation is Fantastic Four. As of right now, there are 4 cloaked display pieces at D23 that people are speculating could be the FF. But another possible buyer of Avengers Tower could be Norman Osborn.
Right, which I think is more likely, because you're not. For one, I talked to you about this last night, that if Fox had sold the characters back to Marvel for the Fantastic Four, or if they had made some sort of deal to let Marvel make Fantastic Four films, they would have fucking talked about it by now. They wouldn't have waited for some sort of reason.
I think even if they wanted to wait, it probably would have leaked somewhere as well.
Right. So there's no way that we'd be, approaching D23 with Fantastic Four news. We would have heard about it at some point leading up till now, unless the deal was literally just made this week, and they've just had statues just sitting around in storage waiting for this moment, which I don't buy that either.
It also would be really hard to include characters in Infinity War that they only acquired the rights to within the last few weeks.
Correct.
When the film just finished production
yesterday.
Yeah.
So they just finished producing the film. Unless they're going to be a part of Avengers 4, and they're not part of Infinity, they're part of the cleanup of Infinity. Because they're not shooting them back to back anymore, from what I understand. There was going to be a couple months break, and then they're going to go back and shoot the 4th one.
Well, hey, maybe that could very well be what it is as well.
But at that point, you would think that there would have to be casting for them to make a statue of them. Because you're not just going to make generic statues and just say, okay, but later they're going to look different because we found, fucking George Clooney to play Mr. Fantastic.
I mean, you could reveal character design. I mean, you don't necessarily have to have someone.
But just the logic leaps you have to make to get to this being the Fantastic Four are things that I have trouble with.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Logic leaps to get to this being the Fantastic Four. When more obviously, these are right next to the giant Thanos statue that they've already unveiled at D23. So it's probably just the Black Order.
I mean, that's
a lot more
highly likely.
There's a lot more characters than 4 in the Black Order. I mean, more classically, there's at least 5. But, given that we don't typically ever get as many characters as we're supposed to get in the Marvel universe, I could see them just shrinking it down to 4.
I mean, that theory makes a lot more sense than the Fantastic Four theory.
But there's a lot of trolls that just keep saying, oh, well, my friend is there, and he knows it's the Fantastic Four. Yeah, do you know that?
I I mean, I'm just sitting here thinking about it and thinking about how the way they left that whole Avengers Tower thing open and the way they kept mentioning it.
I think they left it open because, I think that they wanted it to be the Fantastic Four.
And in all possibility,
they're hoping that they can make a deal so that they can make it the Fantastic Four.
And it is very possible that could happen. I mean, we really probably won't get the payoff to that now until the sequel.
Right. Because if it was just going to be Norman Osborn, which I think is the next most likely thing, they could have just done that in a bonus scene for Spider-Man.
I feel like they would have at least teased Osborn if it were to be Osborn.
Right.
They didn't even have to give a full payoff. They just had to be, oh, here's Norman Osborn signing a piece of paper.
But they didn't even tease it.
No,
so
they didn't.
To me, that means that they're leaving it open-ended for a reason right now.
And the other thing was, it wasn't just that Tony decided to move everything out of Avengers Tower and go upstate. They specifically said it was sold. So,
right. So it has a new owner.
We'll definitely have to keep tabs on that, and hopefully we'll have a show for you next week where we get a reveal, and maybe it'll be the Black Order, maybe it'll be the Fantastic Four, maybe it'll be
Black Order.
Maybe it'll be the Great Lake Avengers. Who knows?
I would doubt it. I'm guessing it's going to be the Black Order. I'm guessing the character that they leave out is Supergiant. So I'm thinking it'll be Proxima. We already know that Ebony Maw and Corvus Glaive are in the movie. That's basically been confirmed already. And Black Dwarf will be my other guess.
Well, we'll just have to wait and see later today, which you'll all probably know about this.
That two of them are in the movie. So,
well, I mean, I know they're already in the movie. Just we'll have to wait on confirmation on what this reveal is.
Right.
And I assume we'll probably wind up having some sort of footage shown. Probably won't be made to the public or available to the public, but
I don't know. We'll see. I think this movie is too big that they can't release footage that they're going to show.
That's possible.
I think that this is the one that they have to release the footage, because it'll be kind of like, when Warner released the Justice League footage last year, and it got instantly pirated so much that they had to release it.
I don't know. It could also be one of those things we're still kind of left in the dark about. But from what I've been hearing, just rumblings of people at D23, and then reporters and whatnot that are also at the expo, that there are heavy speculations that Marvel is going to announce something kind of jaw-dropping about the next Avengers film, or the...
Well, sure, because Mark Ruffalo has said that too. That
yeah.
You're not going to believe they're going to be announcing.
Which I think is also where everyone's getting this potential FF idea, but...
Well, yeah, of course, because it has to be something big. But, John Watts also told us, you're not going to believe these bonus scenes at the end of Spider-Man. And they were the biggest fucking boner killers that I've ever seen. Because you get me prepared for it to be something like, oh, the fucking Fantastic Four bought the Avengers Tower? And then I get, the fucking villain, admitting that he really likes Spider-Man now, so nothing fucking mattered. And fucking Captain America. So who gives a shit?
Yeah. I mean, it is what it is at this point. And we'll just, like I said, we'll have to just wait and see, and hopefully we come back at you next week with another episode of the Deep Six Podcast where we know and we can discuss it.
Yeah, hopefully.
But
the biggest disappointment I think that could come out of this is that they kind of just cop tease something, and then they actually are waiting to reveal it at Comic-Con.
Well, as far as I know, Marvel doesn't have a movie panel at Comic-Con this year.
I don't know. I don't think they do either. But I thought that Marvel did have some... I thought that there were only basically two people that were doing something at Comic-Con. I think it was Marvel and Warner, and I think that was it.
Well, Marvel's doing all their TV stuff at Comic-Con.
Right.
And
I don't know, and I think DC is only going for Justice League, and that's it.
so I mean, I expect if it's gonna be major news that they're gonna really reveal something.
It'll be this and at D23.
Yeah. So
I guess we'll know today.
We'll know eventually. So yeah, that's I guess gonna do it for another episode of the Deep Six Podcast. Matt, why don't you remind the lovely listeners where they can find you on the internet?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at the Matt Barnes. I'm on IG at the Matthew Barnes.
And of course, you can find me on both Twitter and Instagram, Steven_Spevak. You can find the Deep Six Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all at Deep Six Podcast, or just head on over to deep6podcast.com and click the links. You know, it's that fucking easy. Of
Click
course,
the links, bitch.
click the links, bitch. Of course, if you're not subscribed already, why? I mean, you know, it's free. You just got to click that little button wherever you are, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Podbean. You just got to click it. YouTube, click it on YouTube. You can listen to the show there. Just click the subscribe button.
The presentation for Marvel has started.
Oh, shit, of course. Like, didn't I just say that? Of course. As soon as we're about to wrap the episode, they start their shit.
32, they showed the anti-piracy announcement. So they're about to start the feature film one.
Motherfucker.
I don't know. Maybe later today we can get together for an amendment and add something.
We'll see. Maybe we'll have a quick 15-minute episode of the podcast, a 0.5 episode. Who knows?
Yeah, let's see how big it is first.
But, of course, follow us on social media, like I already stated. Go over to deep6podcast.com or just deep6podcast.com and subscribe to the show. Share it with your friends. Let us know your thoughts on anything we had to say in this episode, either in the comments on YouTube, on our Facebook page, tweet at us. Just get at us and let us know what you think. Until next time, that's been the Deep Six Podcast. We'll see you later.
Peace.